I woke up in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, the sheets sticking to my skin like the remnants of a bad dream. But this wasn't a dream. I knew that much. The air felt heavy, dense with something I couldn't name. My throat was dry, and every breath I took seemed to scrape against my lungs. I tried to focus, to remember what had jolted me awake, but all I could recall was a flash of light, a blinding, searing light that seemed to burn itself into the back of my skull. The clock on my nightstand blinked 3:33 a.m., the same time it always did when this happened. The power must have gone out again, I thought, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The nights had been growing stranger, more unsettling, with each passing day. It started about a week ago, with small things, missing tools, doors left open that I was sure I'd closed, that sort of thing. But then I began noticing the cows. The first time, I found Bessie, my oldest cow, lying in the middle of the pasture at dawn. She was dead, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. At first, I thought it was a predator, maybe a wolf or a coyote, but then I saw the cuts. They were precise, clean. Her organs were gone, scooped out like someone had used a surgical knife. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood anywhere, just her empty shell, lying there like some sort of offering. I tried to tell myself it was just a freak occurrence, that maybe someone from town was playing a sick prank, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. And the burn marks, God, the burn marks, they were scattered around her, perfect circles of scorched earth, the grass blackened and curled at the edges. It didn't make any sense. How could something burn so clean, so precise? I buried Bessie that day, deep in the back field where the other cows wouldn't see. But that night, I woke up again. The same flash of light, the same pounding headache. I stumbled out of bed, my legs shaking, my mind still clouded with sleep. I went to the window and peered out into the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw something, shadows moving in the field, darting between the trees. But when I blinked, they were gone. The next morning, I found 2 more cows dead. Same cuts, same missing organs, same burn marks. I didn't know what to do. The sheriff came by, but he didn't have any answers. He looked at me like I was crazy when I told him about the light, the shadows. "Maybe it's just a bear," he said, scratching his head. "Or a pack of coyotes. They're getting bolder these days, coming right up to the farms." But I knew better. There was no way a bear or a coyote could have done it. They don't make clean cuts, don't leave perfect circles of burned earth. I tried to tell him that, but he just shook his head and told me to keep an eye out, that he'd patrol the area for the next few nights. I knew he wouldn't find anything. Whatever was doing this wasn't something that could be caught. The days passed, and more cows went missing. Sometimes I'd find them, mutilated and hollowed out like Bessie. Other times, they were just gone, vanished without a trace. The burn marks started appearing closer to the house, closer to where I slept. I began to feel like I was being watched, like something was out there waiting. I started keeping the lights on, the rifle by my bed, but it didn't help. Every night I woke up at 3:33 a.m., and every night I saw that blinding flash. One night, after losing another 2 cows, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I stayed up, sitting in my living room with the lights off, my rifle across my lap. I watched the clock, waiting for that inevitable moment when it would flicker to 3:33 a.m. I don't know what I thought I'd do, maybe scare whatever it was off, maybe finally see what was taking my cattle. But when the time came, when the clock clicked over to that cursed number, I wasn't ready. The light was brighter this time, like a flare going off inside my head. I could hear a high-pitched whine, like feedback from a microphone, that made my ears ring and my teeth ache. I stumbled to my feet, the rifle slipping from my grasp. I felt like I was being pulled toward the door, like something was drawing me outside. My legs moved on their own, and before I knew it, I was standing on the porch, staring out at the fields. The air was electric, buzzing with energy. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and my skin prickled with static. I squinted against the light, trying to make out what was happening. And then I saw them. They were standing in the field just beyond the barn. 3 figures, tall and thin, their limbs too long, their heads too big. They didn't move like anything I'd ever seen, their motions smooth and fluid, like they were gliding over the ground. They were standing in a circle, their arms raised, and in the center, there was something else. something that looked like one of my cows, suspended in the air, turning slowly as if on an invisible spit. I tried to move, to grab the rifle, to run, but I couldn't. My body was frozen, locked in place by some unseen force. I could only watch as they worked, their hands moving in precise, deliberate motions. The cow let out a low, pitiful moo, and I wanted to scream, to do something, but all I could do was stand there, helpless. And then the light flared again, blindingly bright, and I felt something cold against my temple, a touch, soft and icy, like a breath of winter air. My vision blurred, and the world went dark. When I came to, I was lying in the middle of the field, the grass damp with dew beneath me. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape. I pushed myself up, my head throbbing, my body aching like I'd been hit by a truck. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, and that's when I saw it. There in the middle of the field was a circle of burned earth, the grass blackened and twisted. And in the center where the cow had been was nothing but ash, fine and gray, scattered by the wind. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that spot, trying to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't remember anything after the light, just bits and pieces. Flashes of those figures, their hands moving, the cow turning. But the details were fuzzy, like a dream I couldn't quite grasp. I stood by the phone for what felt like an eternity, my hand hovering over the receiver. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. I knew I had to make the call, if nothing else, just to hear another human voice, to try and make sense of what was happening. But what would I even say? How could I explain what I didn't fully understand myself? Finally, I forced myself to pick up the phone. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before I heard the click, followed by a familiar voice. "Hello." Bill's voice crackled on the other end, the sound of it grounding me for just a moment. "Bill, it's me, Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, just long enough to make my heart race, before he answered. "Tom, what's going on? Everything all right over there?" His tone was casual, but I could hear the underlying concern, the hint of something unspoken. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. "Bill, something's been happening over here, and I don't know who else to talk to." "Well, spit it out, man," Bill said, but there was an edge to his voice, a tension that hadn't been there before. "What's going on?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words, but everything sounded crazy in my head. I could almost hear him laughing at me, shaking his head at my paranoia. But I had to say it. I had to tell someone. "My cows, Bill, they're getting mutilated." I forced the words out, each one feeling heavier than the last. "I've lost a bunch of them already. Organs gone, weird burn marks in the ground, and every night I keep waking up at the same time. There's this light, Bill, and shadows. I don't know what the hell is happening, but it's scaring the hell out of me." The line was silent for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of static. I could almost see Bill on the other end, frowning, shaking his head. "Tom," he said slowly, "you sure you haven't been working too hard? Maybe you're just seeing things. I mean, mutilations, lights, shadows. Sounds like a bad dream to me." I felt a flush of anger rise in my chest. "I'm not imagining it, Bill. You think I'd make something like this up?" "I'm telling you, it's real. I've seen it with my own eyes." Bill sighed, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hang up. But then his voice softened, taking on a more cautious tone. "Look, Tom, I don't mean to doubt you, but maybe it's just predators, you know? Coyotes, wolves, even some kids playing pranks. You can't let your mind run wild over things like this." I clenched my teeth, frustration bubbling over. "Coyotes don't cut open cows like that, Bill. And they sure as hell don't leave burn marks in the ground. I'm telling you, there's something else going on here. Something unnatural." The silence that followed was longer this time, stretching on until I thought maybe he'd hung up. But then he spoke again, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Tom, I didn't want to say anything because, well, it sounds crazy, but..." He trailed off, and I could hear him take a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "I've been losing cows too." My grip on the phone tightened, my heart skipping a beat. "What? Since when?" "A few weeks now," Bill admitted, his voice tinged with reluctance. I didn't want to believe it at first. Figured it was just bad luck or some sicko messing around. "But it's the same as you said. Clean cuts, organs missing, no blood, and those damn burn marks. It's been driving me nuts, but I didn't want to admit it. Didn't want to sound like I was losing it. I felt a cold shiver run through me, the confirmation hitting me like a punch to the gut. Why didn't you tell me, Bill? We could have figured this out together. I was scared, Tom, he confessed, his voice cracking slightly. Scared of what it meant, of what might be out there. And I didn't want to drag you into it, in case it was just something I was imagining. It's not just you, I said firmly, the words coming out stronger than I felt. It's happening to both of us. We've got to do something about it. We can't just sit here and let them keep taking our cattle, or worse. Bill was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, there was a tremor in his voice. What the hell do we do, Tom? How do you fight something like this? Something we can't even see. I didn't have an answer. The truth was I was just as scared, just as lost. But hearing Bill's voice, knowing he was going through the same nightmare, gave me a small measure of resolve. We were in this together, for better or worse. I don't know, Bill, I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. But whatever's out there, we've got to face it. Together, we'll keep watch, stay vigilant, and if we see those things again, we'll figure it out. We have to. Bill didn't respond right away, but then he became deathly quiet, then a low voice. I never heard this type of Bill in my life. Don't ever call me again. Then he hung up. I was on my own. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to go about my routine, tried to pretend that everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being hunted. More cows went missing, more burn marks appeared, and every night I woke up at 3:33 a.m., the light searing my brain. I started staying up all night, too afraid to sleep, too afraid of what might come for me in the dark. I kept the rifle close, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't do any good. Whatever was out there, whatever was taking my cattle, wasn't something I could fight off with a gun. And then one night, it happened. I was sitting in the living room, the clock ticking down to 3:33 a.m. My hands were shaking, my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. I could feel it coming, the light, the sound, the pull, but this time something was different. This time I heard a voice. It was faint at first, a whisper at the edge of my hearing, but it grew louder, clearer, until I could make out the words. "We are coming," it said, the voice cold and distant, like it was speaking from the other side of a long tunnel. "We are coming for you." I tried to get up, tried to run, but the light flashed, and I was frozen again, trapped in place. I could feel them outside, moving closer, their presence pressing against the walls of the house, seeping through the cracks. The air was thick with their energy, buzzing like a hive of angry bees. And then the door opened. I don't know how it happened. I didn't see anyone turn the knob, didn't hear the hinges creak. It just opened slowly, and they were there, standing in the doorway, their eyes, or what I thought were eyes, gleaming in the darkness. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as they stepped inside, their bodies sliding through the air like shadows. They surrounded me, their long fingers reaching out, touching my skin, my face, my chest. The touch was cold, colder than anything I'd ever felt, like ice water running through my veins. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I could feel them probing, searching, like they were looking for something inside me. My vision started to blur again, the edges of my sight going dark. The last thing I remember is the light, blinding, searing, burning into my brain. When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying on the floor, the house silent, the clock stopped at 3:33 a.m. My body was numb, my mind blank. I tried to remember what had happened, tried to piece together the fragments of my memory, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. It just slipped away, leaving nothing but a cold, empty feeling in my chest. I don't know how long I stayed there, lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. Hours maybe, or just minutes. But eventually I got up, my legs shaking, my head pounding. I went to the window, looked out at the fields, and saw that they were gone. Every last one of them. The cows, the burn marks, the figures, all gone, as if they'd never been there. But I knew better. I knew they were out there, waiting, watching, and that it was only a matter of time before they came back. And this time, they wouldn't be satisfied with just the cattle. I hadn't touched meat in weeks. The thought of it made my skin crawl. The The memories of what I'd seen, what they did to my cows, were too vivid, too raw. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them, those lifeless bodies, hollowed out like discarded husks. I couldn't be a part of that cycle anymore. I became a vegan, not out of choice, but out of necessity. The trauma had changed me, twisted me into something unrecognizable, even to myself. But as the days dragged on, the fear turned into something else, something darker. I knew they would come again. The signs were all there, the strange lights in the distance, the flicker of movement in the shadows just beyond the tree line. I could feel it in my bones, a sick certainty that another abduction was imminent. And this time I wasn't going to be their victim. Not again. The plan started to take shape in my mind, born out of desperation and rage. I knew it was dangerous, reckless even, but I didn't care. I couldn't live like this anymore, waiting for the inevitable. I had to do something, anything, to take back control. I made several trips to the hardware store over the course of a few days, careful not to draw attention to myself. I bought bags of fertilizer in small quantities, never more than what would be needed for a normal farming operation. I knew how this would look, but I didn't care. I was past caring. I just needed to make sure no one got suspicious too soon. The last thing I needed was the authorities sniffing around before I was ready. Back at the farm, I worked late into the night. I rigged up the dead man switches. I attached them to my body, wires and triggers concealed beneath my clothes. It had to be perfect. If they came for me, they wouldn't just take me, they'd pay for what they'd done. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, I could feel the weight of the switches against my skin, a constant reminder of what was to come. Knowing I was ready, for the first time in weeks, I finally was able to get a decent night's sleep. I wasn't sure if they'd come for me directly, or if they'd try to take the few cows I had left, but I knew it was only a matter of time. I was ready for them, ready to end this nightmare one way or another. The last thing I remember was lying there in the dark, the air thick with tension, waiting. The clock had just clicked over to 3:33 a.m. when I heard it, a faint hum, the sound of something not of this world. One of the last things I remembered was them grabbing me to pull me out of bed. Then there was a click. Then there was a flash, and everything went white. Headline: Farmer's home devastated in massive explosion. Possible homegrown terrorism suspected. In what officials are describing as a catastrophic explosion, the home of local farmer Thomas Hale was completely destroyed in the early hours of the morning. The blast, which occurred at approximately 3:33 a.m., was so powerful it leveled the farmhouse and could be felt miles away. Initial reports suggest that a large quantity of fertilizer, potentially rigged as an explosive device, was the cause. Law enforcement initially suspected a case of homegrown terrorism, drawing comparisons to the infamous Oklahoma City bombing carried out by Timothy McVeigh in 1995. However, the situation has taken a strange turn, with FEMA and an unidentified government organization arriving on the scene to take over the investigation. Local residents and officials, including Mayor Susan Crawford, have expressed confusion and concern over the involvement of these federal agencies. It's highly unusual for FEMA to be involved in a case like this, Mayor Crawford stated, and the fact that the FBI isn't leading the investigation is even more puzzling. We deserve to know what's really going on here. Speculation is growing among the public, with some suggesting that there may be more to the explosion than meets the eye. However, authorities have refused to comment further, citing national security concerns. The Hale farm remains cordoned off, with residents being warned to stay clear of the area. The mystery surrounding the explosion and the heavy federal presence has left the community on edge, with many wondering what exactly happened on that fateful night.